Hey guys, today I'll be talking about a job. I've had a job since I was 18. We've all had jobs. Um, it's not work, it's jobs. It's what we have to do to make a living. And I've always been very particular the last decade or so, trying to really literally separating those two, work and job. My life's work has been my writing and now my coaching and writing and job. Job is just, this is my job. This is what I do. And there's a distance there. And I work a corporate job. I worked the restaurant industry for over 20 years. And it's great. It's taught me a lot of great lessons, especially going into this coaching business about customer service, treating customers. And one of the main differences that I've learned from, one of the things I've learned from the job itself, I'll go over that really quickly, is the idea that I had read recently from the philosopher Martin Buber called the I Thou. I and Thou is the name of the book. And he talks about two different realities. There's the I it and there's the I thou. The I it, most of us are in this I it. There's an itness to life. We treat things as it. So we have to do this in some way. But the problem, like a lot of things, comes from the imbalance of treating too many things like it and objects instead of a thou. And a thou is realizing in that present moment that's eradicated of past and future or intentions. I'm trying to use somebody for our own selfish or reacting way of just sitting with that person in a thou. And of course, we can't have that all the time either. It has to be a balance. And I bring this up because it's one of the key lessons that I've learned from my own job, because I have had a hate, kind of not hate, not really love, like, let's say hate-like relationship with my job over the last 20 years and jobs in general. I get free health care through my job. It's through my union. I'm in a union downtown, and I have free health care. And for a 48-year-old, that's gold. And so it's known as the golden handcuffs. I don't want to leave the job, but look at all the benefits. And on top of that is I've been with this company and with these people for about a good handful of these people for about 20 years. And one of the lessons that I've learned, big lesson that I've learned, probably the biggest, probably should have shared this at the end of the video, but it comes up now because it's so important to me and I can talk all day about it, is that I could not leave that job because I did hate it for a while. I couldn't leave it without me coming to terms with it. Let me backtrack a second. I've been writing novels for nearly 2 decades, and that was my dream, was to live off my writing, to leave the day job and to do what I love to do, right? Which came with its own challenges that, I'd find out later on. But the idea was, I don't like this job, this 9 to 5, it's not who I am, it's dehumanizing. And that's that itness that I talked about. It's what the machinery is all about. I'll talk about machinery in another video. But it's soul crushing. It could be so detrimental in so many different ways. And this job that I'm working, it's never been physically abusive to me, psychologically abusive. It's not that kind of job. We have jobs like that, and I implore you to get out of those jobs because they can really hurt you in so many different ways. But for me, it was more of I got this job because of the beer money, for the food, for the rent, right? We do that. It's a means to an end. And this is what we're actually doing. And then when I started to lose when that first half of myself began to die away, that's when I was beginning my midlife transition in this free-for-all of, what is this? Like, if I'm not a writer anymore, then who am I? And then before I became a coach, and even throughout being a coach, I was still wrestling with the job. But there was a moment where I thought, this is it. Part of that failure in me was, oh, now I'm stuck in this job. I was supposed to, that was my ticket out of here, and now I can't find a ticket. And when I first began the first couple, let's say year and a half, 2 years of this coaching business, it was the same thing. I had transferred that dream to that. Oh, that's how I'll get out of here. I was always trying to get out of there for a long time. And the point was that two things helped me to change my view of my job. It may work for you, it may not, but this is what happened to me. The first thing was therapy. Therapy, in my last video, I talked about how I came to accept myself and sit with myself and all these different emotions that I had. And what had happened was, what had changed was I began to really feel and sit with who I really was and all the emotions that came with it. And a big part of that was my job. I sat with that hate. I sat with that frustration. I really sat with it and went, what is it about this place that I hate? And I knew, I made a list. Of course I made a list. I make lists. But I really went back to what I hated about that job. And one of the reasons why, and there was a number of reasons, no fault to their own. It was just a job, right? Like so many people that work jobs are in those jobs. One of the things that I hated about it was that it made me turn people into its, and it's a very subservient job. It's a very, you're serving food, and you have to have people skills to a certain degree. And I didn't like myself because I was coming from this place of frustration and anger, and I was turning people into its. It's their fault. Look at these guys. Look at these people. Oh my God, I could never. And it became this resentment. And I had to sit with that resentment. I had to work through that resentment. That was one way. And the other way was reading that book, Martin Buber's I and Thou, but also, actually, I can show you right now. This is I and Thou. I and Thou by Martin Buber. Yeah, and this was just a string of things that I was becoming more aware of. Another was a Japanese phrase, Ichigo Ichie. And it roughly translated, it's hard to translate into English, but the rough translation is one meeting, one lifetime. And it's this idea that we're never going to have this moment ever again. Even if you rewatch this video like 5 more times, you're never ever really going to get what you're getting right now upon the first watch. And I think I might do a video on that too. There's so many different ideas I have. That is a really cool one to dive into. But it was this idea of presence and humanness and thou-ness that I read from Buber, and this phrase that I got from Ichigo Ichie, from the Japanese culture, this idea that there is only this moment that we have. And how it translates into my job is that I work in the hospitality business. And if I hate my job, and if I don't care about you at all, and I don't, right? In a certain sense, I shouldn't. Here's your food, right? But if I'm treating people like its, that means I'm an it too. Because if you're treating someone like an it, you're treating them like an it too. You are an it you're an object treating people as objects. And I think it came from this idea of like, I didn't want to be an object. I didn't want to be an object of fate, an object of this outside world, this machinery that's like, I was a victim, right? And so what I learned, not only through therapy and dealing with these emotions and sitting with them, especially the difficult emotions that came from the job, but also from this idea that I want more humanness. And not only did that book and those ideas that swirled around it, that were more than just Ichigo Ichie and Martin Buber, this idea of humanness and presence, because I had this fear and worry of AI, not only as an instrument of, that we'd have to deal with as a tool for humanity, but how it was dehumanizing us. And I'd had these ideas for a while, and these fears for a while. But I wanted to have that connection. And I felt like the customers, the customers that came into the restaurant, that's how I can exercise it. That's where I can start to begin to build that humanness, right? And with my coworkers too, because they were humans, right? That was how my job taught me about tolerance, right? Because maybe you can't quit your job like I can, like others can. Like maybe you can't quit your job because of the finances, right? That's the biggest thing. But also because like you're scared or like you don't know what's out there. There's a lot of different reasons why not to quit a job. But maybe you can do what I did and sit with those emotions that are really hard to think about, right? You don't want to think of yourself as a bad person. No one does. But we do things that cause resentment, right? We resent others because we don't like what's going on inside. And that's a way to break the chain. So make a list of what you hate about your job and then sit with those feelings. I know it's not that easy. I'm not prescribing anything, but it's something that helped me. Another way is to try to humanize, the job. What is a way that you can find a touchstone, Having a job, we have these things called jobs for the greater part of our entire existence on this earth. And it can be depressing if you think about it. And there's one last thing that I learned from job versus work is that we start having jobs. No one has a career at 18. Maybe you can, but I think that career is not even like the word career. A calling, a calling in life that's bigger than a job. Your work, your life's work, that comes later on. That comes, the beginnings of that, the seeds are planted in your midlife, or maybe even before. They were just ideas that were scattered somewhere. But you start to bring all that together in your midlife transition. And one of the cool things, and I guess I did save the best for last, one of the cool lessons that I learned, the biggest lesson, was that we have jobs at the very beginning, but we have callings, or we have the opportunity to have callings, to have a life's work at the second half of our life. And it's in midlife that we begin to work on that. Because then we have the choice. Then we can say, I no longer want to do what they're telling me to do. I no longer, it's like, it's the difference between an artist saying, this is not the right way to paint a picture, but this is my way, right? So what's your way? How will you deal with this job? How will you deal with responsibilities that you can't get out of that are imposed upon you? Whether that might be fatherhood, or an actual job, or look at the roles that we're playing, right? Anyway, that's my take on jobs, and I decided to talk about it because it's such a huge part of our life, and we have options out there, and we have choices on what we can do. And for me, that was coaching. Even though I have my 9-to-5 job still, and it's more like 10 to 5. It's coaching. It's men's midlife coaching that I've embraced, and even then has changed very recently into more of a humanizing aspect. It's my calling. It is what has called me, and I've answered, and it has changed everything. And I'll go into that in the next video. But for now, be safe, take care, and I'll see you later.